Today on Mormon Times, remembering September 11th, 10 years later, stories of faith, hope, and healing.
Even in America's darkest moment, the mere act of rising a flag, which is a symbol of one nation under God, can be an uplifting experience and give hope.
Utah sculptor Stan Watts creates a memorial to honor the fallen from 9/11.
I'm going to go to the World Trade Center in the morning.
One Utah family avoids the tragedy when they accidentally slept in. A split-second decision they say saved their lives, and professional advice for making sense of tragedy. Questions that help you cope. Good morning and welcome to Mormon Times. Ask anyone where they were 10 years ago during the terrorist attacks on 9/11, and most likely they'll remember it in vivid detail. Experiences both tragic and miraculous from that fateful day are still being shared. Today we highlight some of the positive stories of healing and of faith that came as a result of that day. Rising through the tons of rubble in the aftermath of 9/11, through the debris and thick gray dust, waved our nation's red, white, and blue.
And I think that the whole nation as a whole felt something go here, and they remember where they were, not only when 9/11 happened, but where they were when they saw this flag rising on the rubble. Even in America's darkest moment, the mere act of rising a flag, which is a symbol of one nation under God, can be an uplifting experience and give hope. And so it's my responsibility on this 10th anniversary to make that same statement.
So Utah sculptor Stan Watts made it his mission to remember those who gave their lives to save others 10 years ago. His idea was to sculpt the 3 firemen who raised the flag to honor the fallen at Ground Zero.
Back here in Utah, it felt like New York was so far away that they were almost in a foreign land, until the day that we saw that picture of the 3 firemen raising the flag on the pile of rubble, and then it brought home the fact that this was us. And it also, to me, it brought the fact that it's going to be okay, because the flag, to me, is a symbol of one nation under God.
Watts has a history of sculpting men of God. His work of George Washington in prayer currently rests at Valley Forge. He sculpted Abraham Lincoln uttering the words, "Under God." 2 of his favorite works are Joseph and Hyrum Smith riding from Nauvoo to Carthage, and this powerful piece of the Good Samaritan.
One of the things that my teacher Avard taught me was, you can only do so many monuments in your life, and so don't waste your time here on earth doing fodder. Work on things that matter.
What matters to Watts today is honoring those from 9/11, but getting his project approved proved extremely difficult. The 3 firemen did not want the piece to be about them.
I said, "Why did you raise that flag?" And they said, with boldness, to honor the real heroes, those men that answered the call and ran up the stairs. It's not that you're firemen, it's not that it's you, but if you were just average people that had raised the flag, the country needed that. We needed to see in the pile of these ashes some glimmer of hope.
Watts hopes his work, called To Lift a Nation, will bring hope to those who see it. Stan says this is his personal testimony of God and his love of the red, white, and blue. Work he says was not his alone.
Whenever we go off and try to do our own work and try to acclaim our own glories, it doesn't amount to anything. But as long as we're on the side of righteousness, we have the ability to access the power of God because we're doing His work. And imagine if you could bear your testimony in something that will last for thousands of years.
Watts has 2 of his memorials on display currently. The first one, standing 22 feet tall, is in Emmitsburg, Maryland at the National Fallen Firefighters Memorial, and the second one was unveiled yesterday at Sandy City Hall. Well, 10 years ago, Brent Belknap was a young husband and father working on Wall Street. At that time, he was serving as the state president in Manhattan. He remembers that day as if it were yesterday, and he joins us now via Skype. Brent, I need to ask you, where were you when you first heard of the tragedy going on there on 9/11?
I was on my way to work. I was actually underground at about Fulton Street Station, which was one stop away from where I normally would have gotten out of work that day, which was the Wall Street Station near Trinity Church. And I was underground when, on the subway, when we felt a jolt, and train moved on one more station to Wall Street, which is where I got out of work that day. And then when I surfaced out of the ground, still not knowing what had happened, I happened to have looked up behind me, which was toward the World Trade Centers, and could see at that time the South Tower was on fire, had been hit by something, didn't know it was a plane at that time. But there was all of this paper that was fluttering down. I sort of, my first thought was that it was a ticker tape parade. But then I thought, no, it's September, the Yankees haven't won the World Series again. So it must be something else. And I bent down and I looked at the papers that were fluttering and landing on the ground, and saw that they were like people's resumes and company documents, contracts. I'm a lawyer, and I thought this stuff shouldn't be floating around. This is proprietary information for businesses that are in the World Trade Center. But there was one thing that I think was a real prompting. My natural inclination would have been to stay and watch this disaster, not knowing it was a terrorist attack, but this fire unfold. And I felt the most unmistakable push on my shoulder. It wasn't harsh, but it was clear. It was unmistakable. Move, go, get out of there.
Once you realized how bad this really was, as the stake president, what was your first response to your stake and your members?
As stake president, I was concerned that the church was going to basically shrivel up and die here in New York. We just created a ward in Lower Manhattan, which is where Ground Zero is. We just built a building in the northern end of the island. We had other things underway on the drawing board. The church was starting to gain some traction here in New York City. And after the September 11th attacks, I thought, man, all of this is just going to come to an end. People are going to leave. We actually noticed, starting that very first Sunday after 9/11, we had people who had been contacted during the days before through phone trees to make sure that all of our members were safe. And we'd done that within about 48 hours. Approximately 3,000 members of the church had been contacted here on the island in Manhattan and confirmed that they were alive, that nobody had been killed in the disaster. A number of people who we hadn't seen for a long time actually were starting to come back. For a while, actually, we call them 9/11 saints, members of the church who previously had not been active, who after the disaster started to come back.
Tell us, when you went back to church that first Sunday, Brent, what was the mood of the members at that time?
Very somber. The mood was very somber. We decided to have business as usual, so we still had a word conference that day. The bishop was asked to speak, and the meeting, I just remember starting out very sad. But he gave some of the most inspiring remarks, and the whole tone of the meeting was, this terrible thing is hit, and even then it hadn't really dawned on us what had happened fully, but it was, yeah, we're going to get through this.
Looking back, Brent, the last 10 years, how do you think this event back there maybe affected your faith and affected the saints as well?
You know, when I look back on September 11th, I cannot, to this day, really watch the images of the planes hitting the towers. That's something I don't want to see. But one of the real highlights, I guess, if you could put a silver lining around a very dark cloud, is that, frankly, in hindsight, the time after the 9/11 attacks was one of the best times for the church here in New York City. I can't think of September 11th and not connect it with the arrival of the temple in Manhattan.
Brent, thank you so much for sharing your perspective, being there on that day, and we appreciate you joining us this morning.
Sure. Thank you
very much.
Okay,
Coming up next, a Utah family on vacation in New York City on 9/11, but an uncharacteristic split decision kept them from being at the World Trade Center that morning. And when tragedy strikes, what happens to people's faith? We'll examine why God lets bad things happen to good people. Do you believe in coincidence? South Jordan's Chad Kendall did, until that terrible day 10 years ago when he and his family were on vacation in New York City.
Actually, this is at the memorial.
Chad Kendall is a stickler for detail.
I'm very detail-oriented, and we had everything planned out literally by the hour, what we were going to be doing.
He's also a stickler for time, even on vacation.
We plan every trip to the minute what we're going to be doing.
Chad and his wife Amy were going to New York City for 5 days with their 4 young children.
We were very excited.
Going to go to the World Trade Center in the morning, the Statue of Liberty around 11 o'clock, and then on a boat ride around the Hudson River that afternoon.
Chad was especially excited to see the World Trade Center. He went there when he was 10 years old, back in 1977.
I can remember as a little boy sitting up on the 107th or 110th floor. They had a little observation deck. You could actually look down, and I wanted my children to experience that, so I was really looking forward to that morning.
That morning, September 11th, 2001.
We were staying across the river in New Jersey, and we were just going to take a cab across there and go straight to the World Trade Center, try to be there between 8 and 8:30 was our goal.
So Chad, making sure he stayed on schedule, set their alarm for 6 a.m.
I remember when the alarm woke us up, Amy looked at me and just said, you know, gosh, the kids are really quiet, and you know, we've got a little bit of time. Let's just go back to sleep for just a little bit and you know, go a little bit later.
An hour and a half later, the Kendalls finally woke up.
I mean, I was angry at myself for getting off the schedule.
The Kendalls hurried and ordered room service while their children were watching cartoons. Then came the breaking news. A plane had crashed into one of the towers.
I was thinking, oh, well, we'll have to scratch that, but we'll get to do everything else. You know, it didn't even dawn on me what was happening at that point. As we watched the newscast, the second plane then hit, and we realized it wasn't just a fluke.
And they say it was certainly no fluke that Chad, the stickler for time, slept in.
You know, it was so out of character for us to sleep in. We never have before or since then, or to get off the schedule that we always have been on. So immediate sense of gratitude. Whether we'd have been in the building or just on the grounds, I don't know which, but we'd have been there. Huge sense of gratitude. I've never denied that we were saved.
Chad travels frequently with his job, and today he leaves on a business trip to New York City. We want to hear about your reflections from 9/11. How did that day impact your faith? To share your thoughts, go to our Facebook page at Mormon Times TV and leave your comments there. Coming up next, healing through helping others, how the widow of a 9/11 victim turned her tragedy and loss into a passion for humanitarian work, and how to process the pain of loss. We talked with a psychologist on how tragedy impacts our faith. Ten years ago, Liz Howell received the devastating news that her husband Brady was one of the 188 victims killed in the attack at the Pentagon. Though her healing has been hard, she's found peace in helping and serving others in need.
Before 9/11, I had been married for just short of 5 years. Our anniversary was in November and he passed away in September. There's always been something in my heart that has drawn me to humanitarian work, but especially when I lost my husband, I felt this need. I felt that I had something to give. I felt like I could empathize with people, and I felt like I had a lot of love that I could give people, and I was drawn to it. I was drawn to the work. It empowered me, it brought me alive, and it helped me. I felt like that's something that I could give of myself. Haiti changed my life because it put my life into perspective. I was around people who had lost everything except for the clothes on their back. And suddenly all of my problems didn't seem so big. It put it into perspective. Everybody's going through something. And my trials weren't nearly as big as what other people were going through. People who are in need of humanitarian service are those that are poor or needy, and needy in different capacities of need. And I could relate to that, and I felt drawn to that type of work. I was acquainted with loss. I was acquainted with being in need, and I felt like I could really give something, and I not only just give in a physical way, but emotionally I could give. I do what I do because it's meaningful it's substantive, and it makes me happy.
Howell is an employee in the church's Humanitarian Services Department working as a nurse practitioner. She currently trains people on techniques to improve newborn mortality rates. Regardless of what the tragedy is, one question we often ask is why God allows bad things to happen to good people. Psychologist Wendy Ulrich is here to help us sort through this question. Good morning, Wendy.
Good morning.
You know, after 9/11, church attendance increased, no matter what the faith was. But what happens to people's faith when they see something so horrible happen like that day?
Well, of course, tragedies like that can really undermine the meaning that we find in our lives and destroy it. But that's not the most common response. I remember sitting next to a businessman about a week after that event, and he was openly reading a book that had big letters of the title, something about finding God, and that's not the kind of book you normally see businessmen read on the plane. So I asked him about it, and he said, well, I'm not really a religious person, but events like this really make you stop and think. And I think tragedy can have that effect of making us stop and reflect on what matters most.
Absolutely. I think we were all reflecting for quite some time. Can tragedy ever be a good thing in our lives?
Well, it sort of depends on what we do with it. Tragedy is at least an inevitable thing. It's something that we're all going to face. And the Jews, of course, were always looking for Jesus to change their circumstances, to take them out of their tragedies in life. And he didn't do that. He instead taught them to change themselves. I think we still sometimes are looking to God to change the outside circumstances of our lives when he's offering to help us find ways to find peace within without having to change those circumstances. But I think of some things that help us in difficult times. I remember hearing that Walmart sold 3 things, much more after 9/11 than before. One of them was that they sold a lot of security systems. Now, nobody would have been saved during 9/11 with a security system. Right. But it's a sort of reminder of when we're in a troubled situation, the need to kind of look around amid all the things that we can't control and say, what can I control? Mm-hmm. What decisions can I make right now that will help me begin to move forward and make some progress in this difficult time? They also sold a lot of Americana, everything red, white, and blue.
Lots of flags,
those symbols that remind us of our history, of the patriotism in the past, of stories from the scriptures or from our personal lives that help us focus on what can I learn, not just what did I lose. And they also sold a lot of wedding rings, a reminder of the importance of family and of relationships in our lives. I had a client come in the week after 9/11, and he was so upset. He was a successful businessman. He'd gone through a divorce. He had no children. He was estranged from his family. And he'd heard the story on the air about the woman who got the call from her husband who was on the 4th plane, and he was going to go down. She knew this was her last goodbye. And I was upset by that story. I had a husband who flew a lot, and I thought it was horrible. So I thought I knew why it was upsetting to him. But he said, oh, no, Wendy, you don't understand. He said, if I had been on that plane, I would have had no one to call. And just a poignant reminder of the importance of investing in love, in relationships, in forgiving, in taking time with people that we care about.
I think we all used that word love a little more after that, didn't we? When tragedy strikes, what's the best way we can use the gospel to help us get through it?
I think sometimes the best we can do is to remember to turn this over to the Lord. When we get anxious and uptight and frantic about the situation that we're in, to remember that wonderful perspective that we gain from the gospel of Jesus Christ, that big picture that reminds us that if everything is not all right, then it's not the end, because in the end, everything will be okay.
That's a great way to put it. Some of the hardest words to say are, thy will be done, are they not? Yeah. Wendy Ulrich, thank you so much for sharing your perspective on this. Appreciate it. Coming up, how September 11th changed the military.
Up until that point, the National Guard hardly ever deployed.
It's my husband's mission.
10 years later, 2 deployments done. A Utah couple reflects on their journey and how we can all support military families. And now a tribute to some of our missionaries serving in the field. If you have a picture you'd like to share with us, please send it to mormontimes@ksl.com. More than 1.4 million men and women are on active duty in the U.S. military. Many joined the armed forces after 9/11. For months on end, these men and women leave their families to serve and protect.
My name is Julie Blotter,
My name is Tim Blotter.
and this is our story.
The military was something always in the back of my mind that I wanted to do. I was 34 years old, joined the military, the National Guard, went to basic training the summer of 2001, got home, and literally about 2 weeks later 9/11 happened, and that kind of changed my life forever.
And people were like, boy, that was pretty stupid, huh? Not at all. He knows that there's a purpose. He knows that that's where he's meant to be.
The first deployment, I was a flight operations guy. I was deployed for about 14 months to Afghanistan.
It's tough, but I was very, very close to my kids, especially my little son that was left with me. I got such great ward members, especially neighbors that are right next door to me, that I just clung on to. I just would sit next to them, and they were my family for the year. Coming up and just hugging me, and how are you doing? And it's just amazing how little things like that really help a lot.
When I got back from Afghanistan, although I enjoyed the deployment, I thought, well, I just didn't really enjoy the job that I was doing. So then I thought, well, if I'm going to stay in the military, I'm going to do this chaplain thing.
He is the one, the morale booster, the kind of cruise director that kind of keep things rolling around there as the guys are having tough times out there.
My job is to provide their spiritual well-being, whatever that spiritual well-being might be for them.
He loves to serve, and he really honestly has touched a lot of those men's lives. And he's brought the gospel into Iraq, along with a bunch of other wonderful soldiers.
I know it's hard and difficult, but it's something that I enjoy doing.
People are so loving and so sweet when they know that your husband is out serving.
And I really appreciate that, not only for me, but for the guys that I serve, my fellow soldiers, that they have that support.
It's my husband's mission. It's where he belongs right now. I told my son, if we ever see two dressed men in full uniform, if they ever show up at the door, don't let them in, kind of thing. But I know I would not. I would not be upset at God. I would not be upset at the military.
Being a member of the LDS Church sustains me in that, knowing that I'll be together with my family, and just, it's a good work that I'm doing, and I'm happy to be part of it.
Tim Blotter recently returned from a year-long deployment to Iraq. And while he'd like to serve overseas once again, for now, he's enjoying time with his family. Thanks for joining us today on Mormon Times, and thanks for letting me be a part of your Sunday morning the last year. We hope you have a great day.